Hydrogen is becoming a critical pillar of the clean energy transition, but scaling it demands both technological progress and innovative financing. Welcome to Future Energy Insights, brought to you by the World Future Energy Summit. I'm Rob Jones, partner at B2B Connect, and I'm joined by Alicia Eastman, Managing Director at APC Investors, and Santosh Raikar, Managing Partner at Silverpeak. Let's start with looking at what factors are needed to really ensure that hydrogen, green hydrogen in particular, in the future becomes a powerhouse. So Alicia, if I start with you and then Santosh.
So far, they've really focused on the producers and finding ways to subsidize the producers of green hydrogen to get it down to a cheap price. But actually, the producers are helped most by the buyers, because you're going to finance a project like this with project finance. You need an offtake, and you need to get an offtake from a buyer that is very motivated. And you can motivate them with carrots or sticks, but usually both works. So some kind of regulation that says that they need to decarbonize, and if whatever industry they're in can use hydrogen and it's actually more efficient, then that's a good fit. And then some kind of encouragement for them to do a long-term contract, an offtake that you can actually finance the project off of. But because just giving a subsidy for the hydrogen molecule once it's actually produced, it doesn't solve all of your bankability issues. You need to get banked, and to get banked, you need an offtake. You also need studies. You need all of the, just tick all the boxes. But it's really the offtake that is the most difficult usually.
Yeah, so those are both all great considerations. So I'm not going to belabor on that. I mean, it's a standard project finance. You need to have an offtake. Without that, the project is not bankable. In terms of where the subsidies goes, I'm a little bit ambivalent, in the sense that you could either have producer subsidies or you could have the supply, the demand, subsidies. It doesn't really matter in the broader economic context. What does matter is something you hit upon, is there has to be a compulsion of some nature, and which is something that we have seen in the renewable energy market. So I recently was meeting with a very large scale manufacturer, and they said, look, we actually can displace significant amount of our carbon footprint by just switching from coal to natural gas, and we have every intent to make go all the way to zero, because we can only offset to a third of the carbon footprint by using natural gas, but it costs more money. I mean, you have to be realistic, right? I mean, it takes 60 kilograms of hydrogen in order to make 1 ton of steel, and you can use whatever price that you want to use, 8, 10, 7, whatever that you want to use, and you can see that it's comparable with the price of the steel itself. So their point was, if I'm making a steel using green hydrogen, then my product is differentiated, right? And there has to be some mechanism whereby, certain manufacturers of the end products, should have a compulsion to buy a certain amount from the green hydrogen, or my skill is
when you say compulsion, though, are you talking about a government compulsion or compulsion from, say, industry or the consumer?
Mostly they were basically eyeing towards government. But the way I look at it is basically there's something similar to the renewable portfolio standards, which has existed in the renewable energy market for a long period of time. Now, obviously, what the governments there do is they require the distribution company to have that obligation. So the end users get basically what they intend to get. Something of that nature is important. There has to be some price differentiation. If somebody is using green hydrogen, then they have a differentiated product, and that differentiated product should yield a differentiated price. Either you do that way, or you make a compulsion in terms of the similar to the renewable portfolio standards.
There are other compulsions, though, as you went on that track. I think we're seeing with shipping, you have companies like IKEA, some Amazon. We'll see how that goes because of politics. But a number of companies that want to be green, their customers want them to be green, and on a sort of per item basis, it doesn't make any difference at all to the price for the end user. So they would much rather be happy knowing the whole supply chain is green. And that's actually moving shipping companies to buy green fuels and to use green fueled ships. So
is that
it's not nothing.
But and also then you're replacing, heavy fuel oil, which is extremely bad. So that's a good thing as well. But that's a long-term strategy, or is you're seeing a lot of that happening
It's
now?
been the first to take off this shipping, actually. So they have these auctions, and they've had different types of green fuels, hydrogen-based typically, um, and they're really willing to do it. Now you could argue that IKEA might do more. Like, why are they making disposable furniture? I mean, furniture shouldn't be disposable. But
IKEA argue, actually, because I've had this conversation with them, they argue that they're not making disposable furniture, that actually that can be recycled, reused,
yeah,
has second life.
interestingly, some of the fast fashion companies are also interested in having a green supply chain, and again, you could argue you shouldn't have such throwaway stuff, but at least they're making it greener. I mean, I'm not gonna I'm not gonna blame them for making it as green as they can.
So
And
once you start seeing something like consumer demand, industry demand, for instance, if the car manufacturers suddenly found that they couldn't sell their cars unless they're making them with green steel, that suddenly becomes a big driver.
yeah, and for a lot of cars, it wouldn't be a huge increase in price to have your car be made from green steel. Like, it's what, $1,000 more maybe? If your car is $90,000, you're not even gonna notice it. You put, like, some knob on. I think the
Yeah,
Tesla,
actually,
coffee holder was, like, $800 at one point.
no, actually, the skill manufacturer talked to, and you can guess who it is, but they actually, their specialty is they go into high-end cars. So they already know this, and that's one of the reasons why, they are willing to offset, and that's how it is. So, no, but the problem is, as a producer, I'm producing in buckets full of these hydrogen, right? And going out and, catching these small fries, they're important, but it's kind of hard. That's the challenge, right? I mean, um, there are a lot of companies in, like, for example, I was just in Amsterdam, and I'm going there again next week. There are a lot of, like, coffee roasting companies, for example. They do want to change, and, to your point, they are not going to be able to. They should be able to charge that price because it's not it's incremental in their whole supply chain. But it's kind of hard to go and find when I'm manufacturing or producing 90,000 tons of hydrogen, right? So that's different.
Are different parts of the industry thinking about the complete value chain, or are they thinking about their part of it? Because again, with the example you're using, be that fashion, shipping, cars, that's there's a lot of parts to that value chain
Yeah.
that need to come together and work together.
I think
Are they seeing them?
more integration makes sense because, as you said, you have to do it at scale. That's the number one thing, and that's something that we realized with Intercontinental Energy, and it's why our projects are so big, is because that's the only way you get the price down. It's economies of scale and then all the sorts of add-on benefits if you're doing an integrated project. And if you can further integrate into car manufacturing, or you're further integrating into something else, I don't know what, all kinds of chemicals that you can make with hydrogen, so many things. Having that whole integration is gonna be cheaper overall, and it's securing your own market, and then you can probably find a channel that's much larger, so you're not going and knocking down the doors of individuals.
Yeah. So the way I look at it is, I would love to, but I don't anticipate a euphoria where, or, what do you call, a scenario where everything is hydrogen based. I think that's, utopia. That's the word I was looking for. Um, but there are certain segments in the market, refineries is one of them, right, which are going to have substantial impact, right? I mean, many of these refineries, and we own two of them, right? We just acquired recently the second largest refinery in France, and we are going to decarbonize that, in the eventually. And so, the amount of hydrogen that they use is significant. So, to me, those are the lowest hanging fruits because can buy in bulk and they can pave the road, and that will, potentially support some of the larger projects the way we are talking about, and then that will eventually lead to the hydrogen economy, for example.
Mm.
That's how we should think.
Do you think China is going to dominate this market, or drive the market, shape it?
China will dominate the electrolyzer story. The alkaline electrolyzers have been around for more than 100 years. And Chinese electrolyzers are fairly cheap. And so, so far as the manufacturing supply chain is concerned, I do see that there will be, significant, they will have significant pull in that direction. And honestly, shame to the Western governments, they did not encourage solar manufacturing, and China did, take on that mantle, and now they are, insurmountable in a lot of ways. I think, I hope the Western companies or Western economies will generally, grab this ball when there is an opportunity and, work with it. But I think it will be harder to dislodge the Chinese, grip on the electrolyzer side. Now, whether China would be able to export, that's doubtful, because China has a pretty big monolithic block, and there might be hydrogen market that could be developed internally. Same thing in the US, although right now the market is in doldrums, but there has been always this anticipation that most of the hydrogen that will be produced in the US will be used locally. So not from that perspective. I think
That's actually one question I was going to ask is there enough planning around local use? Because often when people talk about hydrogen production, or certainly in this part of the world, they talk about signing offtake agreements and exporting. But is there a much bigger opportunity being missed of local use? That's actually one of the reasons I asked about China as well. I was thinking, would that start to produce and use locally?
I mean, with our projects, because they're so large, I mean, we have 45,000 square kilometers of land, and we have communities to think about, and we're desalinating water, making excess potable water, which can be used by the community. And companies are setting up next to us to produce materials that we need. Eventually, we will be making our own green steel, because we'll use our roll of steel ourselves to put up the turbines.
So effectively making industrial communities.
Yeah, creating, yeah, exactly. Just working off every synergy we can. Waste heat of one thing going to another, but building that community to be as beneficial as possible. And there's so many things we can do. We can grow food under the PV. Like we're in the middle of the desert, but if you have the shade of the PV, there's actual food that you can grow. We can use the excess oxygen. We can put it with some fertilizer and ammonia. It could be the fertilizer, and you can actually create topsoil. And a lot of the world is being desertification is a big problem. Not being able to have arable land is a big problem, and one of the issues with it is biofuels. I mean, one of the issues competing for arable land are these like energy replacements that are not actually, at the end of the day, potentially that good of a replacement, and they often we run out anyway. So it's the thing that is great about hydrogen and ammonia and any of the byproducts is that you really only need seawater, sun, wind, and you need nitrogen, and that's like 80% of our atmosphere. I can grab it with my hand. It's a lot easier than carbon capture. I mean, this is
So you mentioned also that your projects you build at scale. Is the arguments that have, when I've talked to people about hydrogen, there's one camp that say just start small, get it going, and then build on top. And then there's another side that say, let's try and build these kind of mega projects. Where do you fall? Is it
I mean,
in between, or
we actually have some IP protected sort of methodologies for the layout of the facility, where we use the facility itself as storage, and we essentially don't really need batteries or backup too much, because it's all coastal deserts, right? So it's sun all day long, and then it's really windy at night. So instead of that intermittence issue that you typically have with renewables, we pretty much have constant energy. And then we have a way to store it, because we're making hydrogen, and the hydrogen is going through pipelines to make ammonia. So we can actually store in our own pipes, and we can change the compression so we can store more or less in the same pipe. There's lots of things that we can do. But yeah, it is, if you really look into the details, it makes a lot of sense to do it in sort of a modular way. So we think that about 1.5 gigawatts is like the right modular size that makes sense, where you get a good return and you get the proper economies of scale, but you still need to pick a good site. And then you can keep putting them in, you can keep building them out. And it's like pancakes. Like the first one is going to be great. Your turn's not going to be great. But then you really get to know what the issues are with that particular area, and you just keep rolling them out, and it just gets better and better. And with your off taker, you come to some kind of agreement that's like, oh, it's going to suck for both of us for this first agreement, but you're going to be in phase 2 and phase 3 and phase 4, and it's always going to get better. And the thing about renewables, if you're making green energy, green hydrogen, you're making it with renewables, right? And renewables are predictable. So I have no idea what oil is going to cost tomorrow or next week or 5 years from now. I really have no idea. I mean, these things happen in seconds. Things can change. But with a renewables project, that's a 25-year project where I know what my cost is for 25 years. So it's a lot easier for me to say to an off-taker, this is the cost. This is what it's going to cost. And not going to be whipped around by wars and all these sort of things that are going on that change the price of energy.
And I guess also that predictability means that when you're looking at finance, is it easier to make these projects
No,
bankable?
obviously, offtake is I teach, in my spare time at Boston College and Sloan School of Management. And one of the things which statement I make in the class is offtake is the seed that grows into something called the project. That's the bare minimum essential fact, right? I was in front of a pension fund about 6 months ago, and one of the things that they said that green hydrogen knew they are going to be anxious about the technology risk, but they said offtake is more important than the technology risk because this is something that can be analyzed, that can be wrapped in a way. So offtake is very important, and that's where where I was leading to is we need to create opportunities whereby the consumers, the end users, or whoever it is, has an ability to or compulsion to basically buy the green product, right? Similar to hers, we have a 1100 megawatt wind farm, 800 megawatts of electrolyzers that will produce about 90,000 tons of hydrogen. The project is in Newfoundland, Canada. And similar to your story, we have a great hydro resource. So the wind doesn't blow all the time. Oh, it does blow more time in Newfoundland than anywhere else in North America because no, there is no sun. But we have hydropower, and we have excess hydropower in Newfoundland, and so we are making the best use of it. So that's the nature of it. So there is excess energy, and hydrogen provides a very reliable way of transporting that excess energy from one geography to another geography, right? And that's where we are focused on. And we have export-oriented project for Europe because we are at the shortest distance from North America because we are at the northeasternmost location in North America, and Europe is like 4,000 kilometers away. So that's our strategy. That's our and then we'll go through that. The other point I wanted to add to your earlier conversation, we own 110 gas stations in Newfoundland, Nova Scotia, Prince Edward Island. We have a JV with Suncor Energy, and we own 110 gas stations. So one of the things which we are going to pilot as we progress is, can we use this hydrogen and build a local economy around hydrogen as a transport? We own ports, we do transshipment, we do bunkering, and we are going to explore whether hydrogen can be used for some of these things. But in the grand scheme of things, that will be still a small drop in the bucket that we are producing. But we are looking into commercializing just beyond what we are going to
for expectation of trucking.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes, those are the kind of things. So we are trying both ways, right? I mean, obviously, unfortunately, well, there's a good and bad, right? The good part is in Newfoundland, there's plenty of land and there are only 500,000 people. The bad thing is there are not many people, who can do that. But, it's just there is a start. You have to start somewhere, right?
Not doubts, but there have been people who are not as sold by the idea of hydrogen and a hydrogen economy. How is the industry going to change their minds, do you think?
Well, I definitely think education is really important. And I did a sort of session for BMW one day where we had a number of people who came in who were thought leaders from different areas, and they were not energy experts, they were not automotive experts, but they were like regular people and also could influence regular people. So some writers, politicians, etc. And we were talking about mobility, and whether or not hydrogen or, electric vehicles, battery versus hydrogen fuel cell vehicles, essentially. And the whole room had sort of just decided that this was already done, that it was going to be electric, and there were not going to be any hydrogen cars. And I was like, but some of you live in London, right? And they were like, yeah, yeah. Like, do you have a garage? No. Like, do you have a parking spot? No. Like, how are you charging your car, right? If it's electric, they're not. It's just sitting there. It's just sitting there, a pile of steel that costs a lot of money and pollution to create, and it's just sitting there because they can't get it. They can't. They're not going to go to a station and wait for 2 hours to have it get filled up. And the closest spot for them to use it is like 5 blocks away. That it's very hard to motivate. So there are definitely lots of situations where even in mobility, not just trucking, where hydrogen cars are preferred. And that's why BMW has an X5 coming out that's hydrogen, and they also have the X5 that's electric. They see the market in both places. But the thing that I realized, that the reason that we need this kind of education is that nobody in that room knew anything about energy. They did not know how electricity came to be. They thought if you put a plug in the wall, that was green. They all thought that. They had no idea how a power station works. They had no idea that there were fossil fuels involved in that energy if they were sitting in that London room with me. They thought it was green because it's electricity. So electricity has done a good job marketing itself, but it doesn't always come from green things. And for the most part, it doesn't. And the grids are not green. The grids are at best half green if you're lucky. So I think it really is. I think it makes a lot of sense. And they've also done some studies showing that it makes a lot of sense to have both sets of infrastructure. So have your grid, it needs to be built out, it needs to be expanded. You're going to have more and more electric that's coming from green sources. But at the same time, you can be building the infrastructure for hydrogen, which tackles different things. I mean, it is good for different purposes. And so you need the infrastructure for that as well. And it's actually cheaper to build them both separately than to try to just have this electrical grid be all things to all people when it's already suffering. I mean, the grids all need to be upgraded basically everywhere in the world. So I think that it makes a lot more sense to just do both. And I think people don't think it makes sense because they don't understand energy at all on a
Are
just
either,
generally speaking.
are either of you looking at green hydrogen and data centers?
Yes. Yeah. We actually, for my fund, I have an investment in a company called capex, which makes semiconductors using half the energy of other fabs, and they operate using half the energy of other semiconductors. And this goes into GPUs, CPUs. This can be used for AI, et cetera. And they've changed the material. It uses ceramics, so it's recyclable, unlike the current options. And it's lower latency, like a lot of benefits. The performance is higher. There are a lot of things that we did to basically reduce the need for energy. And I think that's the best combination. If you're selling a green product, if you can also find a way for them to need less, you put it together, and that is just a total winner because they don't really suffer at all.
So, without being too technical, how is it using hydrogen as part of the manufacturing process?
So, in the etching and a number of the parts of the actual manufacturing, they've replaced some of these 10,000-year chemicals with hydrogen, with green hydrogen. So that was a big problem with semiconductors, is they have these just way worse than CO2 chemicals that are going into the atmosphere. So that is a particularly difficult thing. But with the data centers are using a lot of energy, and especially if they're co-located with like a AI R&D facility, and they're actually running models and doing inference. This is really, really energy consumptive. So one of the things that uses a lot of energy is cooling those units down. So you see these data centers that have vats of water. But that's why our semiconductors are so valuable, because they run at room temperature and they do not need vats of water to cool them down. So that's one of the reasons they use less energy, is because they're not heating up. And that's because we use a different material. that it's not hydrogen specific. Also, though, we do use green ammonia to grow the crystals when we make the wafers. So that is a cool side. There is hydrogen everywhere.
This-
It's something that we've discovered. But hydrogen also should be used with these data centers, as if you put the data center on a microgrid, right? You would give it everything it has. If you're in Canada, you give it hydro. If whatever you can give it, you would get the cheapest and cleanest energy, and you just optimize the usage and use either hydrogen or battery or both to carry you over for when you don't have one of these inputs to keep you at constant. Because the data centers have a lot of spikes.
Yeah. Yeah. What about yourself, Santosh? Are you looking at anything like data centers or any sort of AI
So
opportunities?
we have been looking at, we were one of the early pioneers in data center space when nobody was looking at data centers. We did 5 or 6 of them in the like 2018-19 timeframe for like E-Trade, which is now Morgan Stanley, Charles Schwab, PwC. But so far as hydrogen is concerned, we are primarily focusing on, offtakes in Canada. Now, for our own refinery, we could potentially do our own offtake because what we are doing is we are doing a synthetic methane reforming we need hydrogen in the cracking process in the refinery. And we do SMR, which is the synthetic methane reforming for generating hydrogen. So we can replace that with green hydrogen. And so those are some of the, bigger wins that we are focusing on. Obviously, we are looking into the pilots on the trucking and transshipment and bunkering type of things, but nothing beyond that. Partly because again, the project is huge. It's 90,000 tons, and we have to find big holes for that.
Where do you think the powerhouses will be in the future in terms of on a country level? Because it's interesting that when you look at something like the oil and gas sector, we know which countries are
Have fossil
Uh,
fuels.
yeah, yeah, and we know whose economies were driven or maybe still being driven by that, and a lot of those are actually looking at things like green hydrogen as well as a diversification play. Equally, you could come from nowhere because you don't have to have had that fossil
Yeah.
fuel
Mm.
base. You need something that will give you an edge, be that a lot of land, sun, wind, whatever. So who do you think will be the big countries in the future?
So in my opinion, the answer is relatively simple and not too far from what we are seeing today. There are energy exported countries, and the answer is going to be the energy exporting companies, because at the end of the day, hydrogen is energy, right? There's a lot of euphoria about, like, for example, India, right? But India in general is importing energy of all sorts. So it just so happened that, in one particular region, you may have excess generation at a certain time. Well, you better put up batteries and use that later on, because the whole of India is yet to be electrified, right? So in my opinion, it's Canada, for example, where our project is. It's the Middle East. It's Australia. Those are the natural places where, they have been always exporting energy, albeit fossil fuel, but that's the place because they don't need extra energy. You see what I'm to say?
Yeah.
That's the way it is.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, he said it definitely. Those are the best places to put hydrogen. I think, there are locations like what Western Sahara, or as Morocco calls it, Morocco, or Mauritania. There's a number of countries that really have almost nothing. I mean, where GDPs are very small, but they have the huge capacity and really great resources, and they also might even have iron ore, so they could do iron ore beneficiation. They might have like a combination, like you said, with the vertical integration. Like if you can combine it with something else that needs the hydrogen, that's even more compelling. So there places like that are popping up a bit, and I think I do think Africa will play a role. But right now, the places he listed are the easy targets, I would say.